Perhaps you haven't lost interest in people. Perhaps you've simply found yourself. Perhaps what they call coldness is just your soul finally at peace with silence. Perhaps you're not withdrawing. Perhaps you are, for the first time, getting closer to who you truly are. Rumi said, "You are born with wings. Why do you prefer to crawl through life? But what if you stopped crawling, and the other person is still on the ground? What if what you call disinterest is, in fact, freedom? Freedom from no longer needing to fit into empty conversations, shallow relationships, and connections that require you to diminish yourself to be loved. That feeling of indifference that came after your spiritual awakening. It's not a lack of love. It's an excess of awareness. You start to realize that certain people only liked you when you were dependent, that many only approached you when you were in pain, but never when you were seeing your light. And now that you've begun to heal, to love yourself, to understand yourself, those same people seem to lose their shine. Or perhaps they never had it. What happens after awakening is almost indescribable. It's as if the soul gains new eyes. You feel more. You perceive more. But paradoxically, you become less interested, less in broken promises, less in roles that forced you to please, less in emotional games, and much less in relationships based on exchange, control, or scarcity. You look back and wonder, how did I endure this before? And the answer is simple. You weren't awake. You were hungry for attention, for belonging, for any fragment of validation the world threw at your feet. But now, something has changed. You no longer need to be seen to exist. You no longer need to be desired to feel worthy. You no longer need to chase after things to feel like you belong. Because after awakening, what was once lack becomes clarity. What was once attachment becomes self-awareness. What was once need becomes silence. And this silence frightens those who have not yet awakened. You realize you've lost interest in people who only knew how to love parts of you, never the whole. That you've lost the taste for conversations where you have to pretend. That you can no longer force smiles in environments where your soul is silent. That something in you has died, but it was exactly what needed to die so that you could be reborn. It's not arrogance, it's not ingratitude, it's not ego. It's the soul asking for space, the soul asking for truth, the soul saying, "I've crawled long enough. Now, I want to fly." Spiritual awakening isn't all sunshine and roses. It hurts. It isolates. It breaks. But it liberates. It liberates you from the obligation to remain where you don't grow. It liberates you from emotional dependence. It liberates you from the need to be with someone just to avoid being with yourself. And that's where everything starts to change. You start to realize how much you were erasing yourself, how much you tried to be agreeable to maintain connections, how much you adapted, molded yourself, lost yourself, all in the name of connections that today no longer make sense. Because when you awaken, superficiality suffocates, selfishness wounds, the absence of presence becomes deafening. You can no longer accept crumbs because your soul has tasted the banquet of silence. And once you taste it, everything that is false loses its flavor. And that's why you lose interest. Because what once seemed enough now feels empty. Because what once filled me now distracts me. Because what once seemed like love now sounds like disguised neediness. Perhaps you're wondering if there's something wrong with you. Maybe you're feeling guilty for not caring like you used to. But what if that guilt isn't yours? What if that feeling is actually a sign that you've evolved? What you feel is not disinterest. It's discernment. And this is where Rumi whispers again. When you stop looking outside yourself, you will find everything within. But and what does this really mean? Why do connections seem to die after awakening? Or is it you who are being reborn? If this makes sense to you, if somewhere deep within your soul, these words resonate as a silent truth, write it in the comments below. I woke up, and I'm finding myself again. This video isn't just content. It's a mirror, a place where your soul can finally see itself without masks. So if you felt this, don't keep it to yourself. Leave your like, not out of vanity, but because it shows the algorithm that this type of message needs to reach more lost souls in the same process. And if you feel that this journey is just beginning, sign up no channel. Here, we don't talk about pain. We go through it. Here, Rumi is not just a poet. He is the compass for those who are tired of crawling. Now, let's go deeper. Because what you're feeling isn't the end. It's just the beginning of your awakening. Have you ever felt that after a while no one interests you anymore? That what once captivated you now just seems like noise? As if conversations sound repetitive, connections are nothing more than fragile ties, and relationships, a meaningless effort. Perhaps you've started to wonder if you're becoming cold, insensitive, even broken. But what if that's not it? What if what you call coldness is actually spiritual clarity? What if that feeling of disconnection is just a reflection of an inner transformation? The invisible problem that few understand and even fewer dare to talk about is this. Spiritual, emotional, and energetic awakening doesn't always come with euphoria and light. Sometimes it arrives with silence, with detachment, with a feeling of, I no longer belong here. And that feeling hurts, because it isolates you, it separates you. It puts you in a place where it seems like no one else vibrates like you. Before everything made sense, you sought love, attention, validation. You molded yourself to fit in. You smiled even when something inside you screamed. But now, you can't anymore. You can no longer pretend that certain environments nourish you. You can no longer laugh at jokes that wound your soul. You can no longer maintain relationships that demand constant emotional effort to avoid crumbling. What has changed? Your perception. You have awakened to a level of consciousness where superficiality becomes unbearable, where the absence of reciprocity hurts more than the absence of presence, where presence without depth exhausts you more than loneliness. This is the invisible problem, the silent pain of someone undergoing an inner rebirth, but living in a world that insists on dead relationships. You start to see patterns. You realize you gave too much, that you accepted too little, that you confused neediness with love. And the more you heal, the more you feel. What once enchanted you now bores you, because it's not you who is indifferent. It's your soul that no longer accepts emotional lies, not even the ones you told yourself. And this creates internal confusion, because the world doesn't understand. The people around you start saying you're acting strange, that you're isolating yourself, that you're difficult to deal with. But what they don't know is that you finally started to hear your own voice, that you're not distancing yourself from them, you're just getting closer to your truth. And that truth is uncomfortable. It doesn't fit into molds. It doesn't follow social rules. It disturbs those who are still living in a state of numbness. There's a pain in seeing that many of your relationships were sustained by the fear of being alone. A pain in realizing that you gave of yourself, but weren't seen. That you surrendered yourself, but weren't felt. That you expected something real from people who only knew how to offer you empty presence. It's as if, suddenly, your soul begins to scream for authenticity, and everything that doesn't resonate with that loses its color. The feeling is strange. You want to connect, but not just any connection. You want soul, truth, eyes that see beyond appearances, words that hold silence within, a presence that doesn't require effort to happen. And that, unfortunately, is rare, because the world teaches you to perform, not to feel. It teaches you to hold on, not to flow. It teaches you to want, but not to care. That's why you feel this weariness. Weariness of relationships that demand performance. Weariness of affections that demand your existence. Weariness of being the only one who tries, who sustains, who holds on. But this weariness is not weakness. It's sensitivity. It's your soul saying, I don't want to beg for crumbs anymore. And perhaps on the outside you seem distant, but inside, you are more alive than ever. You feel everything, and you feel it so deeply that you can no longer tolerate shallowness. And that pushes you away, because shallowness is what exists most. But it also protects you, because the deep, even though rare, is the only place where your soul can breathe. The truth that few dare to face is that awakening isn't about gaining emotional superpowers. It's about losing the ability to tolerate what was previously considered normal. It's about realizing that most relationships are built on fears, projections, and expectations, and for those who are awakened, that simply doesn't work anymore. And there's no going back. Once you experience the taste of true presence, of conscious love, of soul-deep conversation, everything else seems like noise. And no matter how hard you try, you can't force it anymore. You can't accept less anymore. You can't betray yourself anymore. Perhaps you're not distancing yourself from people. Perhaps for the first time, you're getting closer to yourself. Perhaps you're not cold, just sober. sober from the illusion that once held you captive, sober from toxic romanticism, sober from the stories you created to justify the absence of real love. And this sobriety liberates, but it also separates, because few are ready to live without fantasy. Few are ready to love consciously. Few are ready to find themselves and lose everything that wasn't true. If you feel that all of this speaks directly to your soul, comment below. What was once attachment is now clarity. This shows me that this message reached the right place, the center of your transformation. Awakening changes everything. It alters the frequency of your soul, the rhythm of your feelings, the sharpness of your perception. What once resonated with you now feels small. People, conversations, environments, bonds that seemed important, suddenly they no longer fit. And this isn't because you've become superior, cold, or indifferent. It's because for the first time, you're aligned with a new vibration, quieter, truer, more spiritual. This is where the spiritual root of this process begins, the invisible diagnosis that many ignore. You haven't lost interest in people. You've simply stopped being interested in empty connections. Your soul has grown tired of feigning presence where there is no depth, tired of smiling where there is noise but no meaning, tired of waiting for flowers where there is only neediness disguised as affection. You stopped investing energy in those who only knew how to drain you. And this to the world may seem like disinterest, but to the soul, it is freedom. Spiritual awakening isn't a pretty theory about love and light. It's visceral. It rips away everything that's false. It dismantles the personas you wore to be accepted. It reveals where you were betraying yourself. And above all, it shatters the illusions you nurtured about what connection is. Because what many call love is dependence. What they call care is control. What they call being together is fear of loneliness. When you start to see this, there's no way you can stay in the same places, with the same people, pretending everything is okay. Because it's not. You can no longer ignore that some relationships existed only to fill a void, that certain conversations were just noise to avoid facing the silence. That much of what they called affection was, in fact, disguised need. And this awakening makes you allergic to it. Literally, it's as if your soul rejects everything that is shallow. You begin to feel discomfort where before there was excitement. You start to realize how much you forced yourself to maintain soulless bonds. You begin to notice how much you distanced yourself from yourself to fit into someone else's life. And now, with this new vibration, it's no longer possible. Your soul simply no longer accepts pretense. It wants truth. It demands presence. It cries out for silence where before there was performance. And it is at this point that many become frightened, because transformation doesn't come with fireworks. It comes with emptiness, with distance, with days of absolute silence. And these moments of silence are not the end. They are the beginning of reconnection with your essence. Because true spiritual awakening doesn't connect you to others first. It connects you to yourself. And only then, from that center, do you begin to attract relationships that vibrate at the same frequency. But before that, it's common to go through a desert, a space where it seems like nothing and no one can reach you anymore, where you feel alone, even surrounded by people, where the longing for what was known mixes with the certainty that you never want to return to that place. And that's normal. Spiritual growth unsettles you. It takes you out of the comfort zone of automatic relationships. It calls you to something more subtle, more whole, more sacred. In this process, you begin to realize that not everything that is intense is true, that not every deep connection is safe, that not every gaze that sees you truly sees you. And that hurts. Because you begin to reevaluate your entire history, the bonds you maintained, the pain you tolerated, the absences you romanticized. All of this crumbles before the light of your new awareness. It's as if, upon awakening, your soul begins to speak another language, and few understand this new language. It is made of silence, of presence, of unspoken truth, of love that does not imprison, of care that does not demand, of a gaze that welcomes without needing to change the other. This is the new vibration, and it no longer matches the world you inhabited before. Therefore, it's natural that many people drift away, or that you drift away from them, not because you consciously want to, but because the vibrations no longer align. What was once familiar now constricts you. What once made sense now suffocates you, because now you feel the soul of things, and if there is no soul, there is no meaning. You begin to understand that true spiritual connection isn't about being with someone. It's about being whole in your own presence. It's about not needing the other to feel complete. It's about sharing, not filling a void. And that changes everything. It changes how you love, how you relate, how you choose to be close. You stop looking for half of someone else, and you start desiring overflowing. You stop asking to be saved, and you begin to be self-sufficient. But the world isn't ready for that yet. It calls you detached, cold, distant, when in fact, you are more connected than ever, only connected to your own soul, to your own path, to the sacred that exists within you. And this sacredness is demanding. It no longer accepts just anything. It wants truth. It wants alignment. It wants peace. And everything that doesn't vibrate at that frequency falls apart. Because now, you no longer want to be accepted. You want to be recognized. You no longer want attention, you want presence. You no longer want noise, you want meaningful silence. If this part of the video deeply touched you, and you feel like you're experiencing it right now, write it in the comments below. My soul rejects shallowness. This phrase shows me that you're exactly at the point in your journey where everything starts to change. For real. What no one has told you is that this feeling you carry, this impression that you're distancing yourself from people, that nothing captivates you like it used to, that connections seem to have lost their luster, is not a mistake. It's not a flaw. It's not coldness. It's simply the soul's natural filter in action, a silent but profound mechanism that begins to operate when you awaken to something greater than the ego. The disinterest you feel is not rejection of others. It's a return to yourself, a homecoming, a reunion with your essence, and this return requires detachment. It requires discernment. It requires space. Few understand this, because most still confuse connection with physical presence, affection with dependence, love with control. But the soul, when awakened, is no longer satisfied with that. It seeks what is real, and what is real is almost always silent. It is subtle. It is free of games, expectations, and needs. The soul no longer wants to prove its worth to be loved. It wants to be, simply to be. And when this state of being settles in, everything else that doesn't vibrate at the same frequency begins to dissolve. Perhaps that's why you've noticed that the more you know yourself, the less you tolerate what you previously accepted without question. Empty words cause you physical discomfort. Disconnected presences drain you. Relationships based on exchange make you want to disappear. It's not that you're becoming unbearable. It's that now you feel deeply, completely, and that changes everything. Because truly feeling means you can no longer pretend. The hidden key to this transformation lies in the silence that settles between who you were and who you are becoming. In that interval, there is a space where old versions of yourself still try to cling to what was, while your essence is no longer content with what is no longer true. And this space can be lonely. It can be confusing, but it is also sacred. Because it is there that you begin to make different choices. Choices that don't please others but that honor your soul. You stop chasing, not out of pride, but because you finally understood that what is yours doesn't require chasing. You stop insisting on conversations that always end the same way, not because you gave up on communicating, but because you began to value listening to your own silence. You start to withdraw before being rejected, not out of fear, but out of wisdom, out of self-respect, out of self-love. This inward turning is what many call selfishness, but it's not. It's spiritual self-care. It's preserving your frequency. It's aligning with the truth that dwells within you. And this truth doesn't shout. It doesn't demand. It simply observes. It simply feels. It simply knows. And in this silent knowing, you begin to realize that not everything that leaves is a loss, that not every absence is a lack, that not every connection that broke was unfair. Some departures were disguised deliverances. Some distances were gifts from the universe. Because now, your soul only wants to remain where it can breathe. You're not distancing yourself from people. You're getting closer to yourself. You're occupying an inner space that was previously filled with external validation. And this closeness reveals secrets that were previously hidden by the noise of neediness. You begin to realize that some relationships only existed because you didn't know how to be alone. That some bonds were fueled by fear, not love. That many connections only persisted because you hadn't yet truly chosen yourself. When the soul awakens, it begins to filter everything: words, intentions, energies, silences. And this filter is not rational. It doesn't pass through the ego. It's visceral. It's a no that settles in the body. A no that needs no justification. A no that simply knows it's no longer there. And this knowing sets you free. But freedom comes at a price. It demands conscious solitude. Because in the beginning, almost no one understands what's happening to you. People distance themselves, or they demand things from you, or they say you've changed. And yes, you have changed, but not in a negative way. You changed because you stopped betraying yourself. You stopped silencing your soul to maintain relationships. You stopped hiding your light so as not to bother others. And that bothers those who still live in the darkness of the ego. What you are feeling now, this need for withdrawal, this desire to no longer explain yourself, this impulse to protect yourself from everything that sounds superficial, is not weakness. It is spiritual strength. It is your soul demanding space to flourish, and flourishing requires pruning, cutting, releasing, letting go of everything that does not nourish, everything that does not honor, everything that does not accompany. And that's when you begin to understand that true love doesn't hold you back, doesn't demand anything, doesn't require you to diminish yourself. True love expands. It recognizes. It welcomes without trying to change you. It allows you to be exactly who you are, without adjustments, without masks, without fear. But to reach this kind of love, you must cross the desert of disconnection. You must let go of the crumbs. You must have the courage to wait for something that hasn't yet arrived, but that your soul already knows exists. This waiting is not passive. It is active. It is made of silence, presence, and self-compassion. It is made of small but powerful decisions, not responding to what hurts you, not insisting on what drains you, not remaining where your soul does not flourish. And these decisions shape your energy field. They tell the universe, I know what I deserve. And the universe responds. If you feel that this awakening process is clearing away people, situations, and even versions of yourself that no longer make sense, comment below. I'm filtering with my soul. This shows me that you are experiencing what few have the courage to experience, the return to oneself. Perhaps before, you accepted any crumb of attention. A cold, good morning, an emoji sent late at night, an empty, I miss you, thrown as emotional bait when you were almost shutting down. Perhaps before, the promise of presence was enough, and you would create in your mind an entire future alongside someone who could barely sustain their own present. You transformed silences into a sign of depth. You justified absence with empathy. You romanticized distance as a kind of sacred mystery. But today all of that seems small. It seems fragile. It seems like a lie. Because now, after your emotional, energetic, and spiritual awakening, silence has become more nourishing than any superficial conversation. You've begun to realize that it's not about how much someone talks, but about what remains after the conversation ends. And often after the call is over, after the message is read, what remains within you is a void, an echo, an absence greater than before the contact. You began to understand that quantity of presence is not synonymous with depth, that there are people who are by your side every day but have never truly been with you, that there are words that sound beautiful but are hollow, and there are silences that heal more than any declaration. Before, you begged for presence. You insisted. You explained yourself. You gave your all just to keep someone close, because being alone seemed unbearable. It seemed like punishment. It seemed like failure. But now you've learned to value your own absence, not as an escape, but as strength, as spiritual wisdom, as an act of self-preservation. You understood that withdrawing is also a form of love, that not responding to what hurts you is self-care, that letting go is not weakness, but a silent pact with your soul. Now, you no longer chase after promises. You observe actions. You feel vibrations. You read between the words, between the gestures, between the silences, and when there is no truth, you retreat. Not out of coldness, but because you can no longer betray yourself. Perhaps you are experiencing this right now. Perhaps there is someone in your life who still says they love you, but makes you feel alone. Perhaps you find yourself in a relationship where you speak with your whole body, while the other person responds automatically. Perhaps you are stuck on a memory, a past, a hope, but you know deep down that it no longer resonates with your new vibration, and that doesn't make you wrong or ungrateful. It awakens you. You spent so much time trying to be enough for others that you forgot to be whole for yourself. You wanted to be a good memory in the lives of those who barely knew what to do with you in the present. But now, you look at it with a different perspective. A perspective that doesn't judge but understands, that doesn't deny what you felt, but no longer accepts diminishing yourself to feel again. Awakening is this, a silent process of renunciation. You begin to renounce everything that is insignificant, everything that requires you to become half of yourself to fit into someone else's life. And this kind of renunciation is not valued socially. People around you may call you arrogant. They may say you think too highly of yourself, that you're too difficult. But what they don't know is that now, you are no longer available to be half. You no longer want relationships where you have to be the other person's therapist, where you have to explain, guide, and support them. You want emotional reciprocity. You want soul-deep listening. You want a presence that welcomes, not a presence that demands. You want companionship that strengthens you, not companionship that weakens you in the name of supposed love. And if that company doesn't appear, that's okay. You've learned to wait. You've learned that silence isn't emptiness. It's fertile ground. That solitude isn't punishment. It's an altar. That being alone with your own truth is better than being poorly accompanied by illusions. It is in this waiting period that you begin to blossom. To others you seem distant, but inside you have never been so close to yourself. You have never listened so much to your intuition. You have never felt so clear about what you want. And that is why it hurts. Because now your soul knows exactly what it no longer wants. You look at the past with compassion. You don't judge yourself for having accepted too little. But you also no longer allow the old to return in the same guise. You are changing. You are healing. You are clearing the inner spaces where there was once an urgent need for attention. And now, there is only peace. But this peace is selective. It doesn't mix with just any energy. It no longer accepts being invaded. And that's why today, touch needs to have soul. A gaze needs to have presence. Words need to have intention. You no longer accept shallowness, because you have known depth. And once the soul touches what is true, it can no longer bear to live on the surface. Perhaps that's why you've become quieter, more observant, more selective, not because you've lost faith in love, but because now you understand that love to be real needs to be conscious. It needs to be whole. It needs to be light. And it is in this lightness that the soul finds rest. Because what was once tension now needs to be fluidity. What was once attachment now needs to be exchange. What was once struggle now needs to be dance. A dance of souls that do not need to heal each other to remain, because they have already done their own inner work. If you feel you've gone through or are going through that point where silence has become more meaningful than someone's forced presence, comment below. Peace taught me to wait for what is real. I want to know if this part of the journey resonates within you as well. You feel guilty for distancing yourself, for not responding like you used to, for not chasing after the person who distanced themselves first, for not insisting on maintaining conversations that no longer nourish you. You feel guilty for no longer being emotionally available to someone who only knew how to seek you out when they needed to be heard, but never knew how to listen when you were the one falling apart inside. You feel guilty because you learned that loving means insisting, that being together means enduring everything, that being good means never saying enough. But what if all of this is just conditioning? What if this guilt you carry is just an echo of a version of yourself that didn't yet know how to choose itself? The world is not accustomed to awakened souls. It doesn't know what to do with those who say no without needing to justify themselves. It finds strange the silence of those who have learned to be self-sufficient. It calls coldness what is simply peace. And you, still trying to adjust to this new state, begin to question yourself. You begin to wonder if you are being too harsh, if you are making a mistake in setting limits, if you are becoming insensitive. But Rumi whispers, "Don't lose yourself trying to fit where your soul no longer lives." And this phrase pierces you like a sacred reminder. It's not pride, it's preservation, it's healing. It's emotional maturity. It's awareness. Because now you understand that continuing in suffocating relationships that require constant effort to keep the connection alive, that only work if you pretend everything is okay. That's what coldness towards your own soul truly is. And distancing yourself from all of that isn't being cruel. It's being true to yourself. Have you ever noticed how the world applauds those who self-sacrifice but criticizes those who choose themselves? How they call the ability to stay in toxic relationships noble, but label saying, "I don't want this anymore," as selfish? That's exactly why guilt arises. Because you're reprogramming everything. You're breaking patterns that have been normalized for generations. Patterns that said, suffering for love is a sign of depth. That resisting disrespect is a virtue. That being the last to leave is proof of loyalty. But now you realize that true love doesn't demand sacrifice of your emotional health. That a true bond doesn't ask you to hide your pain. That a true connection doesn't disappear when you decide to prioritize yourself. And that changes everything. Because the more you awaken, the more you realize. There are people who can only love you while you put yourself second. It's natural to feel guilty at first, especially if you are an empathetic, sensitive, spiritual person. Someone who has always cared, who has always been there, who learned early on that to love is to give until there is little left of yourself. But today your soul asks for balance. It no longer wants extremes. It no longer wants to be the only one holding bridges. It wants lightness, and lightness requires boundaries. Boundaries are not walls. They are portals. They are the most loving way of saying, "I choose to remain whole." You're not wrong for wanting silence where there was once noise, nor for distancing yourself from those who insist on not seeing you, nor for no longer begging for attention, nor for having learned that your absence is also a language. Because sometimes the only way to protect your peace is by withdrawing. And this movement, although it may seem hard for those still in the cycle of neediness, is profoundly spiritual. It's a gesture of healing, of reconnection, of realignment with your essence. Your soul can no longer inhabit spaces where it needs to hide, and it's not willing to compromise its truth to maintain ties. It's not because you distanced yourself that you stopped loving. It's because you started loving yourself too, and that too changes everything. It doesn't negate the other, it includes you, and yet guilt still creeps in, because the old self, the one that sought approval, still tries to convince you that saying no is a lack of empathy. But it isn't. You can be compassionate and firm. You can be sensitive and selective. You can have a big heart and still not allow yourself to be drained until only exhaustion remains. True spirituality isn't about constantly sacrificing yourself, but about discerning where your energy is well received and where it is drained. And when you begin to honor that, a lot changes. People notice. Some distance themselves because they only knew how to connect with the version of you that didn't know how to say enough. Others try to blame you, as if it were your responsibility to maintain what no longer had roots. But there are also those who are inspired, who see your courage as an invitation to heal as well. And these are the connections that begin to flourish on the new path. Yes, you can feel pain. The soul feels. But now, it also recognizes the value of remaining whole. And if that guilt knocks on the door, breathe. Remember, you're not turning away from the world, you're coming home. To a place within yourself where there is respect, presence, truth, where you no longer need to mold yourself to be accepted, where love begins from the inside out. And when that love takes root within, anything from the outside is only accepted if it's a mirror image, never a substitute. If you're at that point where you need to remind yourself every day that choosing yourself isn't selfishness, comment below. My soul no longer hides in order to be accepted. I want to know who is on this silent and courageous journey of returning to themselves. You broke the cycle. An old, invisible, and repetitive cycle where you gave yourself to be seen, kept silent to be loved, erased yourself to remain. A cycle where attachment wore masks of love, and insistence was mistaken for depth. A cycle of begging for emotional crumbs, of trying to prove your worth in bonds that only survived while you bled. But now, something inside you has finally given way. Not out of weakness, but because your soul grew tired. Tired of chasing, tired of asking for space, tired of trying to fit into lives where there was never a place for it. And that's when something profound happened. An internal rupture. Silent, definitive. You didn't warn anyone. You just stopped. Stopped responding. Stopped trying to explain. Stopped justifying your absence. And in that stopping, a prayer was born. A kind of silent prayer that only exhausted hearts understand. Your new silence is not empty. It's a choice. It's the sound of your soul returning home. This silence is your new language. It speaks for you when you choose not to argue anymore with those who don't want to understand you. It protects you when you refuse conversations that only serve to destabilize you. It heals you when you turn off your cell phone and for the first time in a long time, feel peace in not being reached by anyone. The silence which was once punishment is now a refuge, and you have learned to inhabit it. Your solitude has become a temple, and that's frightening, because for a long time you were taught that being alone was synonymous with being incomplete, that loving meant being with someone at any cost, that the presence of another was always better than their absence. But now, listening to yourself more deeply, perceiving what vibrates within your own body, you understand some presences weigh more than absence. Some silences hurt more than screams, and being alone with your truth hurts less than being accompanied by lies. You got used to adjusting, to molding yourself, to being what the other person needed, even if it meant betraying yourself. But that cycle, the cycle of giving everything and receiving crumbs, the cycle of staying in relationships that don't see you, the cycle of repeating patterns of abandonment disguised as love, has finally been broken. And this isn't just a mental decision. It's a movement of the soul. It's a liberation that happens in your energy field. You not only decided get out of this, you can no longer remain. There's no going back to who you were before, because something has been recognized. A truth, a limit, a spiritual need to be whole. And to be whole, you had to let go of the company that fragmented you, of the love that destabilized you, of the affection that came with silent demands. Be less intense. Don't feel so much. Don't show everything you think. And you tried. You tried to fit in. You tried to be less soul and more appearance. But you couldn't anymore. Because now, your soul is awake. And an awakened soul no longer accepts living asleep. You look back and hardly recognize yourself in the one who accepted so little. In the one who gave even when there was no reciprocity. In the one who smiled even with a broken heart. Now you understand. That wasn't love. It was attachment. It was fear. It was neediness. It was a desperate attempt to fill a void with the presence of someone who only knew how to dig deeper. But that's in the past. And although traces of longing, of memory, of emotional habit still remain, your awareness is different now, and that changes everything. Now, when something doesn't resonate with your truth, your body warns you, your energy withdraws, your intuition screams, and you listen. Before, you ignored the signs. You forced yourself. You justified. You blamed yourself for not being enough. But today, you know, it wasn't you who asked for too much. It was the other person who offered too little. It wasn't you who felt too much. It was the other person who was disconnected from themselves. And you stopped carrying guilt that wasn't yours. This is the true break. Not with the person, but with the pattern, with the cycle, with the old version of yourself that believed love was constant sacrifice. You no longer need to pay with pain for affection. You no longer need to wait for the other person to change for you to feel peace, because peace is now born within. And from within it begins to create a new field around you, a field where only what is true enters, where only what is reciprocal remains, where only what respects your time, your feelings, your soul flourishes. You broke the cycle, and now you stand before a void, a still strange space where silence reigns, where messages dwindle, where the contact list seems shorter. But this void is not abandonment. It is preparation. It is purification. It is the sacred interval between what you cease to be and what you are about to become. And in this interval, your soul breathes. Your energy is renewed. Your intuition is strengthened. Not everyone will understand this choice. Many will judge your withdrawal as indifference. Others will try to pull you back into the old dynamic. But you know there's no longer a place for you there. You know that, even if you try, you can no longer fit into that mold. Because now, you demand truth. And truth, when it arrives, demands that everything that was an illusion crumble. This is the price of awakening. You lose attachments, but you gain presence. You stop being surrounded by people, but you become surrounded by truth. You say goodbye to versions of yourself, but you finally find yourself. And that encounter is what makes it all worthwhile. If you feel you've finally broken that cycle of giving yourself away until you lost yourself, and are now in that sacred space between old pain and new awareness, comment below. My solitude has become a temple. I want to know who else chose themselves when nothing else made sense anymore. You haven't lost interest in people. You've simply stopped denying the interest you have in yourself. And this shift in awareness, though it seems subtle, changes everything. It transforms how you look, how you present yourself, how you choose. Because until then, your gaze was always turned outward, always seeking in others what you had forgotten within yourself. Attention, care, recognition, presence. You chased after all of that as if it were vital, when in reality what your soul was asking for was for you to return home. But when that return begins, when you come back to yourself, something profound breaks. The illusion that the other is responsible for your completeness ceases to make sense. And with that you stop running. You stop begging. You stop surrendering without filter, without criteria, without presence. You begin to see yourself, to listen to yourself, to take care of yourself. And everything that once excited you, but came from a place of emptiness, ceases to move you. Because now what moves your soul is no longer urgency, but presence. It is no longer neediness, but awareness. It is no longer a desperate desire to be loved, but a profound need to truly love yourself. And this is where many people get confused, because it's not that you've stopped loving others. It's that now you love from a different place, a cleaner place, a more whole place, a place where you no longer need to diminish yourself to fit in, where you no longer need to beg for the smallest gestures, where you no longer accept halves because you spent too much time trying to convince yourself that they were enough. You begin to understand that there's a huge difference between interest and escape. That much of your previous giving wasn't genuine love. It was escapism from yourself. It was fear of looking inward. It was a desperate attempt to fill an existential void with temporary presences. And now that you've begun to embrace that void yourself, now that you've learned to sit beside your own solitude, now that you have the courage to look at what hurts without seeking distraction, everything changes. The search ends. The anxiety subsides. Despair gives way to breath. And you begin to realize that perhaps you never knew true love because you were never whole enough to receive it. Because while you were searching for someone to save you, you still saw yourself as someone who needed saving. While you were searching for someone to see you, you remained invisible in the mirror of your own soul. But now, something realigns. Now, you are here, with you, for you, in you. And this is where true attraction is born. The quietest, the most magnetic, the most powerful. Because when you are with yourself, when you are interested in yourself, when you stop abandoning yourself to be accepted, your energy changes, your frequency changes, your field changes, and you begin to attract only what recognizes you, what sees you, what resonates with you, what doesn't require effort from you to be. This shift in consciousness is painful, yes, because it distances you from everything that was familiar. It isolates you from old bonds, repetitive patterns, shallow affections, but it is also in this isolation that you truly listen to yourself for the first time. And in listening to yourself, you realize that you always knew, you always felt, you always intuited that there was a calmer love, more conscious, lighter. You were just too far from yourself to be able to access it. Now you've stopped denying what your soul has always known. You've stopped sabotaging yourself with stories that love hurts, that relationships are difficult, that it's normal to feel empty next to someone. It's not normal. It was only common because you hadn't yet awakened. But now, awakened to yourself, you no longer tolerate what wounds your peace. You no longer negotiate your essence to be accepted. You no longer trade your authenticity for company. Because you understand that being alone in truth is infinitely more nourishing than being accompanied in falsehood. This new attitude might be mistaken for arrogance. Some will say you think too highly of yourself, that you're too selective, that you've become difficult to deal with. But the truth is you're just finally being true to yourself. You're not difficult. You're light. You're present. You're whole. And those who can't handle that, perhaps never cared about who you really were. You spent too much time molding yourself to avoid rejection. Now you prefer rejection to betraying yourself. And that is awakening. That is rebirth. Rebirth not as a new character, but as the most authentic version of yourself. Rebirth not to please, but to live in truth. Rebirth with scars, but also with discernment. Rebirth in silence, but also with firmness. Rebirth, knowing that not everyone will understand, but those who do understand will remain with soul. And it is here that love begins to draw near again, but not as before, not as an urgency, not as a distraction, not as salvation, but as something I find, as an extension, as shared breath between two beings who are already sufficient unto themselves, but choose each other. Love that does not invade, that does not demand, that does not bind. Love that is born from within and finds an echo in the other, without needing to get lost in the process. If you've made it this far and feel that this shift in consciousness is also happening within you, comment below. I chose to stop abandoning myself. I want to know who else is experiencing this sacred transition between the old self that begged for love and the new self that learned to love itself first. The soul has its own frequency. It doesn't make noise. It doesn't impose itself. It doesn't shout. It simply emits a silent yet profoundly true sound, which can only be perceived by those who have also learned to listen with their hearts. And that's why so many relationships break down when you awaken. Because you stop shouting for love. You stop begging to be noticed. You stop forcing connections with those who only know how to look at the surface. The soul no longer accepts living through effort. It only remains where it is recognized, and not recognized for its appearance, its function, its expectations, but recognized in its essence. Rumi said, "The soul has its own frequency, and only remains where it is recognized without needing to shout." This phrase, when listened to deeply, is not just beautiful. It is a spiritual diagnosis, a mirror, a reminder, because perhaps what you have experienced lately was not a separation, but an energetic cleansing. Perhaps you were not abandoned by anyone. Perhaps you were spared, removed, protected from environments where your soul would need to shout to be noticed. You spent so much time trying to make yourself understood, trying to explain yourself, trying to convince others that your sensitivity wasn't an exaggeration, that your intensity wasn't a lack of it, that your presence deserved to be felt. But now, that's no longer enough. You're tired of having to justify what you feel, tired of translating your soul for those who can't read silence, tired of molding yourself to become understandable, because you understood that the soul cannot be explained. The soul perceives itself, the soul recognizes itself, and that either happens naturally or it doesn't. This new frequency at which you vibrate now no longer seeks to please. It no longer seeks to reciprocate. It no longer wants to be desired by everyone. It wants to be felt by those who know how to listen to what is not said, by those who know how to touch without invading, by those who can remain silent beside you without feeling uncomfortable. This frequency is selective, not because it considers itself superior, but because it respects itself. It doesn't approach just anyone. It waits, it observes, and it only opens up where there is truth. That's why silence has become your home, and that's why noises bother you so much. Because now your soul has become more sensitive to what is dissonant, to what is forced, to what is rehearsed. You feel what is not said. You perceive what is hidden. And more than anything, you can no longer remain where you have to fight to be accepted. You began to trust yourself more, to trust your nose, to trust the subtle signals your body sends, to trust the discomfort that arises when your frequency tries to adjust to a vibration that no longer matches yours. And when that trust grows, it takes root. It begins to protect you, to spare you, to guide you only to where there is true presence. And it's at this moment that everything starts to make sense. When you look back and realize that the silences that hurt you actually taught you, that the absences that wounded you actually freed you, that the distances you didn't understand actually saved you from continuing to shout in places where nobody really wanted to listen. Because the soul, when it matures, understands that it no longer needs to beg for attention. It chooses where to rest, where to remain, where to flourish. You are not difficult. You are profound. You are not cold. You just grew tired of burning yourself trying to warm bonds that were always lukewarm. You are not distant. You are in resonance with a truth that only those who have faced their own emptiness can sustain. This new frequency at which you vibrate is the fruit of all the pain you have embraced, of all the nights you cried in silence, of all the times you stayed, even wanting to leave. And now that you have left, You have left towards yourself, towards the center, towards your true frequency, and whoever wants to walk with you will need to feel the path, not just step on it. They will need to touch it with presence, not with haste. They will need to remain silent with you, without trying to fill every space with empty words, because now you know. The soul doesn't need to be explained, only felt, and that's only possible when you're on the same wavelength. You are not alone. You are attuned to a new layer of reality, one where encounters are rarer but much more genuine, where touch is lighter but much deeper, where love doesn't come to fill a void, but to celebrate wholeness, where presence is not measured by time but by the quality of silence. And perhaps you still find yourself sometimes doubting whether all this makes sense, whether you're being too demanding, too harsh, too selective, but your soul knows. Your soul feels it. Your soul doesn't want any more confusion. It wants peace, not just any peace, but the kind that vibrates in harmony with your essence. And that's why it prefers to wait, because now, what it wants is not quantity, but truth, not noise, but presence, not words, but resonance. If you feel you're in that phase where you only stay where your soul is perceived without needing to shout, comment here. My frequency doesn't beg, it acknowledges. I want to see who else is buzzing in this quiet, yet whole place. You've made it this far. You've passed through every layer, every silence, every word that echoed within you as if written for your soul. And if something brought you to this point, if you felt that at some point everything said here seemed to speak directly to your story, to your silent journey, to that hidden pain and that concealed rebirth that almost no one understands, then perhaps, yes, you are vibrating at this frequency. Perhaps finally you have rediscovered something that has been hidden within you for a long time. And this reunion isn't about euphoria. It's not about shouting to the world that you've changed. It's not about creating a new version of yourself to show off. It's about feeling yourself again with more depth, with more truth, with more presence. It's not about losing interest in the other person. It's just that you can no longer pretend that what is shallow fulfills you, that what is noise calms you, that what is soulless presence nourishes you. Your soul no longer wants distractions. It wants recognition. It no longer wants the constant chasing. It wants reciprocity. And for that, it needed to withdraw, to retreat, to disconnect for a while from what only made sense for its neediness and not for its truth. And in that process, it found something much more sacred, yourself. You rediscovered yourself amidst the chaos, amidst the pain, amidst the silence. You rediscovered yourself when you chose not to respond, when you chose not to insist, when you chose not to shout for someone who never wanted to listen. You rediscovered yourself when you understood that your frequency needed to be honored, no longer negotiated, when you understood that love that begins outside of you will always require effort, but love that is born within flows naturally. Perhaps you've experienced nights when you felt misunderstood, days when you blamed yourself for no longer being able to love as before. Perhaps you wondered what was wrong with you for feeling that almost no one else mattered anymore. But now you see more clearly. You are not broken. You are too healed to continue living in pieces. You are not disinterested. You are too sober to be intoxicated by promises. You are not cold. You have simply learned that love without awareness is a prison disguised as affection. And if, at some point, you thought this was loneliness, today you might realize it's freedom, emotional freedom, energetic freedom, spiritual freedom, the freedom to no longer belong to places that demand you dim your light, the freedom to no longer feign interest in what your soul silently rejects, the freedom to no longer betray yourself. You are in another state, on another frequency, in another dimension of your own existence. And this cannot be explained to everyone. It is felt, and only those who are going through it will understand what you have been experiencing. This kind of grief without death, this absence without rupture, this silence that speaks louder than any word, because that's how it happens when you awaken. You stop searching, and you start attracting. Attract what has soul, what has truth, what has roots, what doesn't need to be forced. Attract connections that don't require you to justify yourself, to prove yourself, to perform. Attract gazes that pierce the visible and touch the real. Attract presences that don't need effort to remain. And what comes to you in this state recognizes you, without you needing to say a word. This is the new you, not someone better, not someone superior, but someone more whole, Someone who understands that true interest isn't directed at the other person, but at what the other person awakens within you. And when the other person awakens nothing but doubt, confusion, imbalance, you walk away, not out of lack of love, but out of loyalty to yourself. And it is this loyalty that makes all the difference. It is what guides you now in the choices that once seemed impossible. It is what sustains you when all you want to do is give in out of neediness. It is what strengthens you on days when silence seems too heavy. Because you know, not just any company is worth your peace. So if everything you've read so far has touched you in some way, if you felt that this video brought out parts of yourself that have been silent for too long, comment here now. I haven't lost interest. I've found myself. This phrase is more than a comment. It's an affirmation of identity. It's a silent code between souls that have begun to vibrate differently. Let's see who else is in that same inner space where everything false loses its meaning, and everything true begins to be born. If you've made it this far, something inside you has already begun to change, because whoever stays until the end of a video like this isn't just watching, they're feeling. They're allowing their soul to hear what their mind has tried to ignore for so long. And if this spoke to you, if each word was like a mirror, if each silence between sentences embraced you like a shelter, then perhaps it's time to walk with me. This journey that we've begun together is only just beginning. There's so much that still needs to be felt, understood, and experienced. And here on this channel, each video is a piece of that path back to oneself. So, subscribe, not out of habit, but out of sincerity. Because this isn't a channel for everyone. It's for those who are tired of getting lost trying to please others. For those who want to heal in silence, with depth and soul. The next video that's appearing on the screen is a continuation of this conversation. It will take you even deeper into this process of healing and awakening. And if this made sense, leave a like. Not out of vanity, but so that the algorithm understands that this type of content needs to reach other souls like yours. The journey is not over. It's only just beginning. And remember, you're not getting cold. You are healing. And now, finally, reunited.